So we're moving into our first weekend in the hospital, and it was interesting, I guess, because it's not like we had a date when we were going to be released. Every day we were just there again because they couldn't tell me how long we were going to be in the hospital. So we just basically lived day to day, wondering, honestly, my biggest question was, am I going to be home for Christmas? I never dreamed that I would be there as long as I was, so I felt confident, at least at this point, that probably I would be. As the days dragged on, I became less confident of that, but we'll get to that in a minute. We're here in our first weekend. Weekends are slow around the hospital. I did have the ophthalmology appointment because they still did that on the weekend. They didn't do both days, but they did it one day. But other than that, it was a pretty quiet weekend. We still had general blood work and that kind of thing, going on. And drops in my eyes, constantly drops in my eyes. Some were given every 2 hours, and others were 4 hours. I don't know. At one point, there were 3 to 4 different drops that they were putting in my eyes all at the same time. It became a running joke with the nurses. They walked in and said, "Guess what? It's drop time." And I would joke and say, "Well, I'd be disappointed if it wasn't," and because that was just my life at that point. So this was our first Sunday there, and we listened to some sermons from church, our church and others, and just try to focus on God and realize that He was still in control. And while this caught us completely and utterly by surprise, it did not catch Him by surprise. We were still putting our faith and our trust in Him that good was going to come from this, because many times Paul has said this to the mentoring group: if we really believe that God is good, then we have to believe that everything He allows in our life is for our good. It may not always be pleasant, but it's for our good. And that's what really I was focusing on, is that God was taking us through this for my good and for Paul's good. So we now come into our next week there. We knew surgery was coming. They wanted to do surgery in my right eye, and it was called vitrectomy. Essentially, they were going to go in and they wanted to clean out all the debris. They kept calling it debris. They said there's so much debris in your eyes. And they wanted to clean that out. That would open up some of my vision, was their hope. It also would make it so they could see what was going on in that eye. And they wanted to culture that stuff to see if they could grow anything to give them some insight as to what was causing this. But because I'm on a blood thinner, I had to be off that blood thinner for 5 days before they could do the surgery. They also wanted to do a lumbar puncture, and I also had to be off the blood thinner for them to do that. So essentially, they pretty much took me off the blood thinner once I got in a room, anticipating this. So Monday was the day for surgery and the day for the lumbar puncture. So the lumbar puncture was in the morning. They came to my bedside to do that. And again, the people, that did it, and I only saw these people one time, but the team that did that, not only were they technically good at what they did, they made it just so comfortable. They talked with me and even joked with me and encouraged me. It was the same when I had the MRI. I never saw those 2 technicians again after that, but they were so funny and so pleasant and just, made it, a bad situation a really good one. And this was just another example of the kind of care that we were getting from everyone. The ophthalmology team, seeing them almost every day. Well, they were like my kids, they were, all of them were young except for one. And just a quick side story here. The one woman that did the ultrasound on my eyes, this was her thing. This is what she did. And she'd been doing it for years and years. She told me, she said, "My prayer team prayed for you at church. I hope that's okay." And that's the first I realized that she was a Christian. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Is that okay? And so from that point on, she just continued to be such a source of encouragement for me. So that was just a side note. She was on that ophthalmology team that I was seeing every day. She was one of the technicians that did the ultrasound. But on Monday, back to Monday, I had the lumbar puncture, which went fine. I wouldn't say nervous about it. I'd never had one before, but it was fine. It went well. They did a good job with that. And then about 1:30, they came and took me to surgery. I slept through the surgery, so it went really easy for me. Paul.
So they come and take you, and you go down to the pre-op area, and they prepare things. And our pastor is able to come in and pray with us. And the individual, ophthalmologist who was doing the surgery, this is her specialty. She had done thousands of these and was very comfortable with the procedure. And of course, I'm not quite as comfortable as she is because I've not gone through this before and I had no idea what really was going to be the outcome. And anytime you do a general anesthetic, there's always the complication possibility of something happening that'd be really disastrous. And I pulled up to Judy, got real close and said, God has you in his hands as you go into the operation. He has you in his hands through the operation, and he has you in his hands when you come out on the other side. What I didn't know was whether that meant she would be in heaven or she'd be back with me. That was my prayer, that I would have her. But it was just another reminder of God has got things under control, even though we may not understand it. Maybe we don't see it. So when that procedure was completed, the surgeon came and spoke to me to give the results. And then eventually it would go to Judy. And one of the things she said was, what I saw immediately, this is bacterial. It is not a cancer. It's not a tumor. We don't have to worry about that. So it's not lymphoma. And I was very encouraged by that because here's someone who really knows her thing very well. As it turns out, now looking back, we see that that wasn't what it was. But in the expertise and all the experience she had, that's the pattern that it would have fit quite well. So she did a great job and gave us a lot of comfort, at least in knowing that, then moving forward.
So the recovery from the surgery was fine. Stitches, they said, honestly, the most discomfort I would feel were the stitches would make it feel like I had something in my eye. And it did, but it wasn't a big thing. I always joked and said, once you've had injections in your eye, nothing else really seems a big deal. So, a little scratchiness in the eye was not a big deal. So then we come to Tuesday. Well, now, because my right eye was recovering from surgery, there weren't going to be any more treatments into that eye, but they did want to do an injection, especially when they thought it was bacterial. We want to do some injections in your left eye to target that. And so again, I was a little nervous about that because I still remembered that very first night at the hospital. And I asked them, first of all, is there anything you can give me just to make me not be all stressed out about it? And so they did. It was just a little Ativan that you really don't notice that you've had it. It was a very low dose, they said, but I was calm. So either it did its work or God was doing his work, which is probably it was God. And when we got in there, the resident and then Dr. Ochoa, the fellow was always there with his residents, but the resident did the injections and it went very smoothly. They did the deadening and they actually did a nerve block in my eye. Did the injections and it was fine. I had no issues with that. In the meantime, my right eye now had improved a lot because they had cleaned it out. So I was now able to see, like I could now determine hallways and I could see walls. Up until this point, my own room, I had no dimension for me. I couldn't see where the doorway was. I couldn't tell where the walls were. I couldn't tell anything. So now they cleared out. So I was able to see some things in my right eye because, of course, now my left eye, because of the block, had been covered up. They wanted that covered up until the block wore off. But my right eye was making it so that when I walked down the hallway, at that point, at one point, I know Paul and Sarah were kind of just walking behind me. They weren't touching me, but they were letting me lead my way. And I navigated around objects. And I could hear Paul whisper kind of to Sarah, did you see? She went around, she saw that. And so I was starting to also see some colors. It was Christmas time and there were Christmas trees and it was OSU, so there's a lot of scarlet and gray, all over. And so some things were starting, the scarlet, I could pick up the red and everything. So some things were improving definitely in that right eye, especially when they cleaned it out and I was now able, essentially I think what Paul described, light was starting to get through because that debris had been blocking it so much. And so that was an answer to many prayers, just to see that kind of encouragement. I still wasn't able to clearly see people's faces, but it was a lot better.